I'm not a philosophy professor. We might be here all night if I was. There's a lot of big ideas in this movie, but lucky for us, the science was pretty focused, and I think pretty obviously we need to have a conversation about the science of longevity. So what I want to do for you tonight is to just briefly touch on what exactly is aging, what's happening when our bodies age, and then where is human lifespan at these days, and then we'll talk a little bit about where the science of longevity is at, and the three main areas that scientists are really focusing on in thinking about how might we extend the human lifespan. So on the next slide, I just wanted to touch on what are some of the symptoms of aging, and these are things that you're probably all familiar with, and some of them are really just an insult to our vanity. We have drooping noses and ears. Maybe you've heard that your ears and noses never stop growing. That's actually not entirely true. It's that gravity starts to act on the cartilage that's in your nose and ears, and they grow, well, they droop at about a rate of 1/4 millimeter a year. Wrinkling skin, you lose the fat layer underneath your skin. But again, those are really more your physical appearance. There's things that are more troubling, a decrease in memory, so your neurons don't fire as well. You hear older people sometimes talk about senior moments, they feel a little bit forgetful. And then to things that are more serious, your circulatory system stops working as well, heart doesn't contract as well, things start to stiffen up. So what is all of this caused by? This is caused on the next slide by cells not working as well. So cells accumulate damage throughout their lifetime, and that damage comes from a number of different sources, some of them environmental. So DNA damage, for example, can be UV light, it can be other chemicals in the environment, it can be a product of cells when they copy their DNA. Sometimes errors are made, and those end up getting incorporated into the DNA and lead to mutation. Other compounds that are toxic to the cell. Oxidative stress, so this is a real big one. Maybe you've heard of reactive oxygen species or free radicals. You've probably heard taking antioxidants is a good thing. So what that is all about, it's really a byproduct of the way that our cells burn sugar for energy. We produce these free radicals, and these are molecules that are really unstable, and the way they seek to become more stable is to bond with other molecules in your cell, like your DNA, proteins, fats, and those damage those molecules in the process and cause the cell to not work as well. And then also, just through one of the, I guess, the glitches that happens when DNA copies itself and cells divide over and over and over, is that telomeres, which are the tips of chromosomes, maybe you've heard of these as something that was a focus of aging studies, get shorter with each round of replication, each time a cell divides, and at a certain point, the telomeres get so short that they signal the cell to stop dividing, and that the cell doesn't die, but the cell stops dividing. And in the next slide, you'll see when cells stop dividing, they, go ahead to the next slide, they reach what we call senescence. So this isn't exactly death, this is a cell makes a choice. Okay, if I divide anymore, I'm potentially going to pass on some really harmful things. So either I'm going to kill myself, which is programmed cell death, called apoptosis, or I'm going to become senescent. And it's sort of a twilight period for the cell. The cell's still there, it just doesn't do its jobs as well as it used to. And looking under the microscope, you can see the difference between healthy proliferating cells on the right and these senescent cells on the left. Just looking at them, you can see that there's a difference there. So why do we do this? Why do cells do this? Well, one of the reasons is it's protective against cancer. So as cells are collecting these mutations and damages throughout their life, there reaches a point where there's almost a recognition in the cell. If I keep dividing, I might turn cancerous, and so it stops itself from dividing. So in the next slide, so scientists, you might be surprised to know that there isn't really one theory of aging. What causes us to age? There's not really agreement in the field. Senescence is probably a part of that. The cell damage is probably a part of it. Some believe that there's a timeline involved. There's a certain clock that cells follow, and eventually the time runs out and the cell dies. So whether it's a programmed event, whether it's an accumulation of damage throughout the lifetime of the cells, it leads to aging, and people are still dying. While the scientists are hashing out what's going on, people are still dying. The average life expectancy in the US, and of course this is different throughout the world, but it's 81.2 years for females and 76.4 years for males. And this was according to the CDC in 2012. And here you can see the top 10 causes of deaths. And this accounted for 73.8% of all deaths in the US. And on the next slide, we can compare that to where lifespan has been over the last 150 years. And you see, this is data that was collected from the countries you see up in the left. And what you see here is really striking. If I walk you through the graph here, we see that life expectancy has just grown at a continuous rate for the last 150 years. And where our data stops, the line becomes dashed, but there isn't really any reason to think that this trend isn't going to continue. And what these other lines are, right here, these horizontal lines, are meant to indicate where people thought maximum lifespan was at certain periods. And you see, we've just gone through those ceilings and continue to go through these ceilings. So life expectancy continues to climb and continues to exceed expectations. So will we continue on this linear trajectory? We can't know that. There's some scientists that think absolutely we will. There's no reason to think the trend won't continue. And there's some that think no, we've sort of plucked all the low-hanging fruit. What were we dying of in the 1900s, or at the turn of the last century? We were dying of influenza, we were dying of gastrointestinal diseases, we were dying of TB. Those are all infectious diseases that we were able to overcome through public health measures, through improvements in sanitation. So some people believe, well, we've plucked all the low-hanging fruit, we've done all the easy stuff, and this trend isn't going to continue. And as well, we've got problems with obesity, problems in some areas with terrible air pollution, that sort of the things, consequences of our modern era are going to start to slow down this trend. But there's others that think, again, we're not going to slow down. So we can't really know that. So what is there, if we go to the next slide, a really interesting question to consider is there a limit to the human lifespan? Is there an intrinsic limit? Well, we don't know the answer to that. We do know that the oldest person with a verified birth date, so there are people that have claimed to be older than this, but this is the person that the birth records were quite clear, lived to be 122 years old and 164 days. So she's the oldest by a number of years. I don't think anyone else has even gotten to 120 yet. And her name was Jeanne Calment, and she was from France, and she died in 1997. So at least we know that the maximum lifespan is at least 122 years and 164 days, but can we get past that? Moving forward, we don't know yet. We don't know. All right, so on the next slide, I want to ask the question, can the human lifespan be extended then? If we know we can get to at least 122, can we get past that? And we've been studying aging for quite some time, but we haven't really, meaning what's going on in the cells, what's going on in the body when aging is occurring. This isn't something that has gotten a lot of attention until recently, and why is that? Well, for a long time it sort of fell under the umbrella of pseudoscience, the kind of quackery, this idea of trying to get people to live forever. But then there was a change of heart. There was a recognition that one of the biggest, or the biggest, risk factor for a lot of diseases, cancer, diabetes, is age. So if we can figure out what's going wrong or going a particular way in cells as they age, and we can do something to fix that, perhaps we can avoid things like Alzheimer's disease, heart disease, cancer, those top 10 things that you saw on the list, a number of them would be avoidable. So it wouldn't be so much that the goal would be to extend life, the goal would be to live the best life you possibly can, live as healthy as you can for as long as you can, and as a byproduct of that, then your life would be extended. So the three arenas that, again, are getting the most attention these days are calorie restriction, certain pharmaceuticals, and then genetics. And the area that has the most current research is calorie restriction, so we'll start with that on the next slide. So calorie restriction can increase lifespan in model organisms by up to 50%. And a model organism are the animals that we use in labs to do studies that it would be unethical to do in humans, or maybe just it would take too long to do in humans. So what you're looking at in this graph is how caloric restriction increases lifespan in mice. So if you look at these curves here, this first curve is a non-calorie restricted mouse, and you see that if we look at the median lifespan, so at about 50, when 50% of the mice are alive and 50% are dead, we're looking at about, what is that? We'll say 33 months. If we continue that line out at 25% calorie restriction, it's increased, jumps up quite a bit when you're looking at 55% calorie restriction, so right around here, and then a little bit more when we get to 65%. And that similar results, if we move forward, have been seen in yeast, nematode worms, fruit flies, and rats. So these are other model organisms that are commonly used in the laboratory. But if we want to know if these results are translatable to humans, we really want to move into a system, a model organism that's just that much closer to humans. So in the next slide, there's been studies done, recent ones done in rhesus macaques. So these are monkeys. And what they found was that, yes, indeed, there does seem to be an extension of lifespan in these monkeys. But what I really want to draw your attention to here is these studies were done very carefully. If we look at the age of the monkeys when they started at age 10, and that was on purpose. The researchers wanted to mimic what would happen in a human that might decide to embark on a calorie-restricted diet. And they're not going to do it as a kid. They're going to start that as an adult. So they started basically when the monkeys were adults. So again, if we look for median lifespan here, it's about, I think it's about 26 months or so. For rhesus macaques, we see that it's quite a bit extended. And they didn't call this even extending lifespan. They talked about it reducing the risk of death because so many of them were still alive. They don't have the answer yet. How long do you live on calorie restriction? So in the next slide, I want to show you also that these monkeys were healthier. So on the left, in panels A and B, these are two normal monkeys that were fed, or macaques. They were fed just as much food as they wanted. And then on the right, you have the calorie-restricted macaques. And you can see, without being a monkey biologist, you can tell the one on the right looks better, right? The one on the left, you can see, is losing fur. Skin seems to be sort of hanging off its body. Its face looks like an elderly person. It's a little bit withdrawn-looking, bags around the eyes. And you see the macaque on the right looks much healthier. So the big question, though, moving forward, is does this work for humans too? So in the next slide, the answer is we don't know, because this hasn't been going on for long enough to know the answer to that yet. But there have been some small human studies that show that health does seem to be improved in people that are undertaking a calorie-restricted diet. And here are some of the measures on the left there. So you all know about body mass index, so that's a measure of your height to your weight. Anything between about 25 and I think it's about 18.5 is considered the normal range. So you'll see that the people on, so let me orient you to this table real quick. Here's the measurements that were taken. And these are the measurements of the people that were doing the calorie-restricted diet before they started the diet, after 1 year, and then I think this was after 2 or 3 years. So you see that their BMIs dropped, and this is just at the low end of normal. So if you're interested in this and you go home and Google it and you see some pictures of people that are doing this, they look skinny. They're not taking in a whole lot of calories. You can look at the cholesterol measures, so their total cholesterol dropped, their bad cholesterol dropped, their good cholesterol went up. These are triglycerides, look how much the triglycerides dropped. And then blood pressure, systolic over diastolic. So systolic is your blood pressure when your heart's actually constricted, and then diastolic is when it's relaxed. Anything 120 over 80, anything below that is considered to be healthy, and you see that they're very much in the healthy range. And the risk factors for diabetes, I didn't show you that table, also improved. So at least the short-term evidence seems to be that yes, calorie restriction does improve health in people. And all of these people, to start with, this is one of the parameters of the study, had to be within a normal weight range to begin with. So this wasn't, you couldn't be overweight or unhealthy to start. So in the next slide, what does this mean? Well, there are thousands. Do we know anything about the actual extension of lifespan? Well, we don't, because again, this hasn't been going on for long enough. It's really been since the 90s that people have started on this diet, and it's picked up some steam. And there are thousands of people worldwide that are doing this, but it's not an easy thing to do. You need to cut your calories by 25%. If any of you have ever tried to lose a couple pounds, you know that going on a diet is not an easy thing to do. Cutting your calories by 25% is a significant thing to do. So if you're talking about sort of what your average intake should be, if you're a man, that's about 2,500 calories a day. So 25% cut would put you at 2,000 calories a day. For a woman, 25% cut would be about 1,500 calories a day. So just to put this in perspective, I don't know how many of you are label readers, calorie counters, but if you move forward, a bean and cheese burrito from, you go forward, from Rubio's is 820 calories, sorry, go back, is 820 calories. So you've used up a big allotment, and that's not with chips, no chips. You used up a lot of your calories if you have a burrito for lunch. So the real downside of this this diet, you can imagine, is that it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle. These people join, they really hang out with each other. You can't go to dinner parties. You know, they talk about if you want to go to happy hour, you have one drink and you budget it in the week. You don't eat, maybe you cut your calories in half the day before and the day after, so you can have that glass of wine during happy hour with your coworkers. You think about Thanksgiving, all of the celebrations, there's usually cake, and these people are making that decision. We're foregoing that aspect of life for what hopefully will be a beneficial outcome. So moving forward then, we do understand at least partly what calorie restriction is doing within the cells, and it seems to be working through a gene called SIRT1. And SIRT1, sometimes if you come across it in newspaper articles, it's called the anti-aging gene, and it appears that calorie restriction is turning on SIRT1, and then SIRT1 has all of these downstream effects that ultimately lead to increased longevity. So in the next slide, the real question is then, is there some way to achieve these effects, perhaps to activate SIRT1 or to get to some of these mechanisms down below without having to restrict calories? Is there a cheat, maybe? And a drug would be the obvious place to look for that. So if we go to the next slide, I have 3 drugs up here that are so far, well, I don't want to call them the top candidates, but 3 that have been looked at somewhat extensively. Probably some of you have heard of resveratrol. Many of you heard, where do you find that? Remember where it's from? Grapes. So red grapes, red wine. So there was a lot of hype about resveratrol about a decade ago. And part of that reason was what some people call, I think it's called the French paradox. High-fat diet, lots of red wine, and yet live longer than a lot of other cultures do. So that's the, if you call it a drug, the compound that's been studied the most. And it's not a drug in the sense that you don't need a prescription for a doctor for it. You can go to CVS and pick up a bottle of resveratrol. These other 2 that I have up here, we know less about, rapamycin and metformin. Those are actually drugs and were developed for different reasons. Rapamycin is an immunosuppressant that's given to patients that are given organ transplants to try to suppress the rejection response. And metformin is a drug that's given to people with diabetes. Rapamycin, interestingly, so a little bit of a parallel to the movie, was isolated. It's a compound that's produced by a bacterium that was found in the soil on Easter Island. And the native name for Easter Island is Rapa Nui. So rapamycin is named after the island that it was isolated from. I'll talk about resveratrol in just a second. Just briefly about rapamycin. There's been some animal studies that are promising. There's some real concern though, it's an immunosuppressant. So if humans were to take it to try to extend longevity, we have concern then that you might get sick more often because your immune system is suppressed. So right now, there's a really fascinating study going on right now in dogs. People are volunteering their dogs to take rapamycin to see if there's any sort of extension in lifespan, because we all know that dogs don't live that long, and many dog owners would love it if their dogs lived longer. So dogs are a way to get that much closer to humans. And as well, it's not a very expensive study to do. When you're talking about like the monkey study I showed you about, that was a 25-year study. And it's incredibly expensive to keep monkeys in the research context. It costs a lot of money, and there's ethical concerns as well. So if you can get people on board volunteering their dogs, hopefully the dogs get some benefit from it, and then we can get some answers. Does rapamycin actually impact aging at all? So in the next slide, though, I'll talk to you about resveratrol. Oh, sorry. First, though, we do understand, why did I focus on these three compounds? Because we know that they actually do interact with this pathway. So resveratrol appears to upregulate SIRT1, and then the other two drugs work down here in various ways. But the one that we do have the best data for is resveratrol. So on the next slide, I just have a table from a paper that really summarized a bunch of different studies. So what we have here are the animal models that resveratrol has been tested in, and then if they had any sort of effect. So SRVCA is yeast, C. elegans is a nematode worm, Drosophila melanogaster, that's fruit flies. So we see for those three that they did see some increase in lifespan when they're given resveratrol. This Nothobranchus furzeri is a fish you've never heard of that's in Africa. The reason that it's used in these types of studies is that it has a really short lifespan. In Africa, it lives in what are called ephemeral pools, these little lakes that only form after it's rained. So they have to live really quickly, and then they have eggs that are resistant to drying out, and they'll just sort of hang out in the mud until there's another rain, hatch out, live for a few weeks or months, and then they die. So they make a really attractive system for studying aging because they have such a short lifespan. So they found an increase in lifespan of those model organisms. Then we get to mice, which at least of the list here are the closest to humans, and if you look at the list of effects, you don't see increased lifespan or an increase in longevity. That hasn't been replicated in mice. And as far as the work in humans go, a lot of the benefit that you see in model organisms seems to evaporate. It's not translating very well to humans. And one of the most definitive studies was just published a couple years ago. Researchers went to the Chianti region in Italy. There's a lot of red wine there. So these people have naturally higher levels of resveratrol in their blood, and they can take urine samples to really analyze specifically how much resveratrol any given person had, and what they found was there was no increase in longevity there, no increase in, or no decrease, I should say, in any sort of the health problems that would lead to death. So I don't want to say that was the end of the line for resveratrol, but for a lot of people that really took the wind out of the sails for this being sort of the anti-aging pill. Now, there's still companies out there that are trying to market it as such because there's money to be made in all of those supplements, but the science behind it is very, very shaky. And as far as the other two drugs go, we just don't have enough data yet. And again, those studies are really hard to do. If you're talking about extending lifespan, average lifespan being 80 plus years if you're a female, right around 80 if you're a male, those are studies that are going to take a long time. So we're not going to probably have an answer about those drugs for a little bit. All right, so on the next slide, the area though that's really getting the most attention right now is genetics, and trying to understand really, are there particular gene variants that predispose people to long life? And it used to be that sequencing a human genome was a really big deal. The first human genome took about 15 years and cost just under $3 billion to sequence. Now it takes a couple days and costs around $1,000. And that's just in a 10-year span that we've had that incredible advancement in technology. So it's just a really exciting time to be studying genetics and to to be in San Diego. We have a lot of a number of the companies that are leaders in the industry are here in San Diego, and institutes that take advantage of this technology. So this is a great place to be interested in genetics. So there's been a couple of different, well, there's been a lot of different attempts at this. Whole genome sequencing of the world's oldest people. So this was, I think it was 17 or so people that are super centenarian, so 110 years plus, had their genome sequenced. Nothing stood out. They compared the genomes of all of them, and there was no particular variant that seemed to pop out. So on the next slide, there was another study where looking at just a particular part of the genome that called the exome, and that's the part that really just encodes for genes. There's a lot of your genome that's junk, so this is just focusing, or I shouldn't say junk, it's just not actually genes. So this was focusing on just that part of the genome, and in families that had exceptional longevity, and they sequenced the genomes of multiple people from 3 different families. And there was a gene variant that popped out of this study. It's called ApoB. So apolipoproteins are part of the protein, or part of the complex that carries cholesterol around in your blood. So LDLs, HDLs, so ApoB is part of LDL. And so that was a variant that seemed to show up in this family. So that is something to think about. But there hasn't really been a single gene variant that has popped out as the secret to aging, and to be honest, nobody really expected there to be. When you're talking about genetics and you're talking about complicated traits, there very rarely is one gene. It's going to be a bunch of different genes that contribute a little bit to the story. And it seemed, studies suggested in normal lifespan people, genetics is probably about 20 to 30% of the longevity story, but perhaps in the longer lived people, the genetics is more important. So although there hasn't been, in the next slide, there hasn't been a whole lot of success so far in the genetics arena, that's not stopping people from trying. So one of the companies that's really on the cutting edge of this is called Human Longevity, and it was founded in 2014. And I brought this one to your attention in particular because it's in La Jolla, and it's founded by Craig Venter, who maybe you've heard of or read about him in the newspaper, but he's famous for starting a company called Celera that competed with the Human Genome Project and finished sequencing the genome at about the same time. But he's a real innovator, a disruptor. He's really changed the way that a lot of people think about genomics. And their goal of this company is to sequence. Well, right now, they're sequencing about 40,000 genomes a year. They're going to get that up to 100,000 genomes within the next couple years, with the idea that when you have this massive amount of data, that the noise is going to fall away, and that the genes that are important in this aging process are going to rise to the top. And they have partnerships with UCSD, a UCSD Medical Center. So people that agree to this, sign a waiver saying, yes, you can sequence my genome, will have their genome sequenced. If you go to UCSD Cancer Center, if you're there for some other reason, you may be asked if you want to have your genome sequenced by Human Longevity. All right, and then in the next slide, so that's one company. Have any of you heard of the X Prize before? So this is a prize that offers a financial reward for various things. One of them was the first commercial rocket, I think, that went into space. This is similar. This is called the Longevity Prize. And this is offered, I'm not remembering his name, but a billionaire in Silicon Valley has put up this prize. And the goal is to demonstrate, it's a $1 million prize. Through an incentive prize, our specific aim is to nurture innovations that end aging by restoring the body's homeostatic capacity, meaning bringing the body's function back down to how it is when it's young, and promoting the extension of a sustained and healthy lifespan. And you can see that the timeline here, and dozens of teams have registered at this point. So the second registration timeline just closed. So within the next couple of years, if these teams are successful in demonstrating, I think it's a 50% extension of life in mice is considered, might be reasonable to win the prize. So we'll see if anything becomes of that. And then in the next slide, finally, Google is getting into it. Why would Google be interested in aging? Well, as I said, more and more of the research is moving into the genetics. more and more genetics is moving into computers. Now it's not a matter of sequencing DNA, that's easy. It's a matter of dealing with a massive amount of data that your genome would take up a phone book. So being able to process that information and find patterns and so on, that very quickly gets into bioinformatics and computing, so companies like Google are quite interested in that. So they launched a company that they're calling Calico, which stands for California Life Company, back in 2013, and they've recruited some of the very top scientists in the whole world to work on this, again, with the goal of tackling aging. With this idea, you heard Hugh Jackman talking about death as a disease. Not all scientists would agree with that statement, but some of them would. And the scientists that are working at Calico would perhaps agree with that statement and looking to cure death, and certainly, at the very least, to live the healthiest life that we can for as long as we can. So to wrap up, if you go to the next slide, so some scientists are really working away at this, but scientists have a history of asking, can we do this, not should we do this? So I want to start by asking you, do any of you want to live to be 120? That's sort of what scientists are looking at as a reasonable extension of life. Are you interested in that? Would you take a pill for that? What do you think? Anybody willing to share?
Depends totally on the quality of life. I don't want to just have that thing drawn out, and for the last 30 years of that, 120 years, be a vegetable, be absolutely non-functioning.
Right. Of course. Well, the goal of these companies would be that it would be healthy. That you would be, so the people that are on the calorie-restricted diets, I showed you all of their stats. They feel great. They will tell you that they have more energy and all of that. So let me rephrase. If you were relatively healthy, would you want to live to be 120? Is that something you're interested in? Would you buy that pill?
Well, I mean, if cognitively, you know, you were clear, coherent, no dementia, pretty healthy, and I mean, yeah, but that's what it depends on.
Right? Is that the case? Oh, go ahead.
With the calorie restriction is hard to do.
Right.
And even if it might help, that doesn't mean when someone is later 70s or over 80s, when often there's decrements in the immune system, that certain genetic dispositions aren't going to kick in.
Right.
It doesn't mean that they're going to really extend the life. And then on the other side, psychologically, I mean, even if you live, let's say, 2 years longer, which is not a long time, is it worth never, you know, just giving up so much enjoyment?
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying, you know, to junk food, because I don't eat junk food, but, you know.
Right.
Not to ever have birthday cake. I mean, to restrict yourself so much.
Right.
Is that really worth it?
Well, if
it's not a great payoff. I mean, 2 years.
Right. Well, if this is intriguing at all to you, and you just go home and Google calorie restriction or calorie restricted diet, you can just read some New York Times articles about these people, and they're real disciples of it. It's, as I said, it's a lifestyle. You make that decision, you hang out with other people that are doing that. So, you know, for some people, they feel like the trade-off is worth it, and that the animal studies would suggest you're not going to get 2 years, you're going to get, you know, maybe a 25% increase in lifespan. So,
like I said, 2 years. So that's not weird.
No.
So
no, we don't know for humans. So it was so we don't know for the monkeys yet either. So depending on how restrictive the diet can be, it can be up to a 50% extension of life is what they've found in model systems. Maybe 30% would be if you're not, but that's cutting calories quite a bit. So if you're cutting it by 25%.
So if you, well, I used to exercise every day. So if someone's going to the gym and exercising every day, you're doing real aerobic activity, I mean, you need a certain amount of calories too. I mean, afterwards to kind of
right. So I think you can include
so,
that.
So how do you do that if it's only 1,500 calories for women?
I think that if you were doing a lot of burning of calories, you would offset that. You would be able to eat a little bit more, because I think it's about the net calories that you take in. You're wanting to put your body into a near starvation state. because what scientists think is, so why would the body react like that when you're almost starving? The idea is, what is one of the main drives in biology? It's to reproduce. And you want to live long enough to reproduce. So slow everything down, but keep yourself relatively healthy until food becomes abundant again. And then your body is still healthy, and then you can go and reproduce. That was before humans, basically, or before we had agriculture at least, and we didn't have to be at the whims of, feast and famine, but we don't have that problem anymore. But perhaps that is still part of our biology, would be the reason that possibly exists.
And a lot of diets for women suggest 1,500 calories.
Mm-hmm.
Which I need to do.
So is anybody pretty sure they wouldn't buy the pill that would let them live to be 120? Would you say no, thank you, I'm good? Or why are you not interested in that?
Me?
Or I think, are you willing to share why you would?
Sure. Where we came from, where we're going, aren't you curious?
Well, that's sort of what the movie was getting at.
Well, if there was something before us and something after us, we're going to have to go to find out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but living longer allows you to explore more and find out more.
There might be something else on the other side.
Well,
and I'm not talking about heaven right now. I'm just talking like, whoa.
The adventure.
How little we know.
Mm-hmm.
Depends on how this world continues to unfold. That's the other thing. I just call it life, but there's things that I don't want to maybe be around in 50 years, depending on how things are. That's true.
As I'm sitting here and thinking of people or humanoids or apes, whatever group you want to put us in, historically, millennial, millions of years. From what I understand, lifespan has been increasing.
Mm-hmm.
It may be that aging is a undesirable mutation. That it might have been better to just live a short lifespan.
Right, I think we can't, so I think one of the answers to that would be that what used to kill us doesn't kill us anymore. So maybe those organisms did have the potential to live longer, but they didn't have enough food. They lived, they didn't have the clothing, the shelter, they didn't have the sanitation that we had.
I think this one curious thing, a little tangent. Walking, talking, tool use, and number. People might say the greatest achievements of humankind. Way back when lifespan was short.
But don't scientists...
So most of the major achievements of mankind were made by children.
Oh, I see.
And so it's all downhill.
Why don't people just see it as a natural part of life? I mean, other species and animals, disease sets in.
Right.
I mean, look at cats. I mean, probably regardless of the diet, they get, well, they all die, kidney disease, but
right.
I mean, it's just consistent across nature and animals. There's a time to be born and a time to die. Things break down.
Right.
It's the recycling of nature.
Right. Well, we're the first organism that's been able to consider these things, that we have the intelligence to do it, and now we're at a point where we can actually think about doing it. No other...
To extend, but probably never to achieve immortality.
Oh, right. Although, again, if this is interesting to you, you can Google all sorts of crazy things that people are talking about, trying to download their brains onto computers so that should, the body, I think most acknowledge at some point the body will wear out. Maybe we can extend it to 150, 200, whatever it might be, but at some point it's going to break down. If you could download your memories into something and plug them into.
Well, we don't have that technology.
No. This is all, but my point is there are some people
Yeah.
that are interested in that. They're on the fringe, but there are people out there that are,
Some science fiction comes to reality,
Right.
quite a bit
Right.
later. It's interesting.
so I think the last, I'm sure we're all ready to call it a night, though the last thought I want to leave you with is, what if we all wanted to live to 120? And that's really where or beyond. And that's where a lot of the ethical questions start to kick in. Do we have the resources to support an aging? We already hear so much about the baby boomers aging and Social Security is going to run out and all of that. And that's banking on an 80-year lifespan. What if we tacked another 40 years onto that?
So is it, the old movies that showed if you freeze a body for, however long, is there a way to revive the cells?
You can freeze cells. Frozen tissue doesn't usually reconstitute like that.
Oh.
So if you were to freeze a heart or something like that, it wouldn't come back pumping. You can for a very short period of time if you're doing like an organ transplant. But no, if you stuck a heart in a freezer for some period of time, it's not, right, as technology stands now, it wouldn't come back. So I think that's,
Excuse me. I know these people die from brainstem tumors.
Mhm.
And on one level, the brainstem that deals with the respiration and the heart and so on might be actually the easiest thing to substitute something for.
Mhm.
And it would be curious to see what would happen if they put all these sort of sensors and stimuli in and kept these people alive.
Right, and that's a bullet point that I didn't have up here because it's even more sort of out on the fringe, the periphery, but this idea of bringing in computers, bringing in technology, bringing in artificial bits and pieces to plug in to us as we're wearing out. We already have artificial joints and things like that, but could we think about artificial brain stems, artificial hearts, things that are maybe a fusion of human tissue and computer, and that be part of what extends our life. But again, that's really getting out into unexplored territory, but something that people are thinking about. So, were there any questions about?
Well,
go ahead.
I just would like to share one more thing. Many people are pretty healthy until they're 30, 40 years old, or 50, 60, whatever number you want to pick. So think for a moment what we will know in 20, 30, 40 years. I actually believe there are people on the face of the earth who do have the potential to live forever at this point. Take a 2-year-old who's healthy for the next 20, 30, 40 years, and what we're going to know by then, a person could live forever.
What's forever?
Forever is,
Well, there's no definition of forever.
At one time we were shocked to find out that even though we believed that space was infinite, we were shocked to find out how much was out there. Well, what were we thinking?
Well, they don't really know how. There's no borders in the universe. They don't know.
Why would you be shocked that there's something out there then? Or
You can't measure infinity. That's the point.
All right, are there any?
It's not measurable.
Are there any questions before we call it a night?
Thank you very much.